Welcome to Bright Spark Recaps Hamlet Act 1 Scene 2. Is Claudius to be trusted? And what is Hamlet's reaction to learning about the ghost, which so closely resembles his father? Let's find out. As mentioned before, the word setting is used to identify and establish the time, place, and mood of the events of a story. It helps us to establish where and when and under what circumstances a story is taking place. So what do we know about the setting of Act 1, Scene 2? It is less than 2 months after King Hamlet has passed away and King Claudius is taken to the throne. This scene takes place within the castle and the court as King Claudius is delivering his inaugural speech. Having established a dark and ominous mood in the first scene, Shakespeare devotes the second to the seemingly jovial court of the recently crowned King Claudius. If the area outside the castle is murky with the aura of dread and anxiety, the rooms inside the castle are devoted to an energetic attempt to banish that aura as the king, the queen, and the courtiers desperately pretend that nothing is out of the ordinary. King Claudius is a hypocrite in that he murdered his own brother while referring to the incident as his dear brother's death. In fact, there are more contradictory ideas and words, of which the best example is the comparison between his brother's death and the color green, which is associated with life, growth, and renewal. So why does Shakespeare do this? The audience finds it difficult to relate to King Claudius contradicting ideas, which leads to a negative impression. He is the antagonist of the play after all. King Claudius is a master manipulator in that he makes provision for possible criticism in his inaugural speech. He mentions Gertrude when saying, "Our sometime sister, now our queen, the imperial jointress to this warlike state," and then refers to Hamlet as his cousin Hamlet and his son. He has considered his relationships in all the ways people might perceive him and manages to cover himself entirely. He expresses his attachment to Polonius in saying that they are as close as one's hand to one's mouth or one's heart to one's existence, and he grants Leotus the opportunity to pursue his studies in France, but illustrates a very different attitude towards Hamlet. Unlike granting Leotus's wish to return to France, he denies this for Hamlet and that he asks of Hamlet to stay in Denmark and not to return to Wittenberg. He doesn't allow for Hamlet to grieve his father's death and insults him by saying that Hamlet is a stubborn coward who is vulnerable and simple-minded. If that doesn't tell you that King Claudius dislikes Hamlet to a great extent, nothing will. Queen Gertrude is portrayed as shallow or superficial in that she says, "Cast thy knight's colour off, and let thine eye look like a friend on Denmark. Do not forever with thy veiled lids seek for thy noble father in the dust. Thou know'st it's common, all that lives must die, passing through nature to eternity." It seems that she is not too concerned by the passing of her husband of 20-odd years, considering Hamlet's age, and she's ready to move on with life. Nothing much is expected of Queen Gertrude in terms of taking over the reins from a deceased husband, and she thus doesn't expect much in return but for everyone to be happy. Gertrude's demeanour in this scene is innocent. She genuinely appears to desire happiness for Hamlet, to desire for him to stay and be a dutiful son. If she is less forthright and honest than she appears here, Shakespeare gives no hint. It is only later on in the play that the audience somewhat grows suspicious of her innocence. Hamlet is the only character in this scene who doesn't seem to be moved by the jovial atmosphere in the courts. Hamlet first denies, still mourning the death of his father, when he says, "Not so, my lord, I am too much in the sun," but later on confesses that he's struggling with having to deal with it. "But I have that within which paths show, these but the trappings and the suits of woe." The word "show" is important here, and that Hamlet has noticed that everyone in the court is putting up a show, as with Leotus, who has come to show his allegiance with the king. Cornelius and Voltimand, who will show their duty in Norway, and he accuses his mother of crying like Niobe at his father's funeral, only to move on with her life soon after. Niobe in Greek mythology was the queen of Thebes who, weeping for her slain children, was turned into a stone from which tears continued to flow, hence an inconsolable woman. He thus says that his mother put on a show of being inconsolable at his father's funeral, but married a brother-in-law less than 2 months later. His mother, Queen Gertrude, asked Hamlet why the mourning of the deceased king seems so particular with him, while Hamlet is of the opinion that perhaps he is the only one who is sincerely mourning the death of his father, King Hamlet. Hamlet's relationship with his mother is complicated. He is willing to obey her and explicitly makes this known by not including his uncle's name in his reply. "I shall in all my best obey you, madam." But he is appalled by his mother's hasty marriage to his uncle, King Claudius. Unlike his mother, he genuinely mourns the death of his father. He says that even animals mourn the death of their loved ones more sincerely than his mother mourns the death of her husband. He makes 2 comparisons here to make us understand just how quickly his uncle and mother did get married. He says that the shoes his mother wore at the funeral of his father have not even been broken in before she wore it to a wedding to a brother-in-law. He also says that the food served at the funeral doubled as the food served at the wedding reception, since hardly any time has passed between the 2 events. However innocent this appears to be on Gertrude's behalf, her behavior has a great influence in Hamlet's perception of women and his intended love interest in Ophelia. Hamlet is extremely depressed and contemplates suicide. He decries his inability to commit suicide, revealing his devotion to the laws of Shakespeare's religion at the time, in that should one commit suicide, you will forever be damned. He compares life to a garden which only grows weeds, meaning that nothing good could come from his life. By saying that his uncle King Claudius is no more of a comparison to his father than what Hamlet himself is to Hercules is quite revealing. Hamlet thus doesn't think himself to be a warrior who acts on impulse and charges enthusiastically into battles. Instead, Hamlet is questioning the reason for his father's death, his uncle's rise to the throne, and his mother's hasty marriage to the new King Claudius. Hamlet acknowledges the important role Horatio plays in his life by calling him my good friend. He is excited to hear about the apparition, which resembles his father, and plans to go along on guard so as to see it for himself. Perhaps this apparition will provide him with the answers he so desperately seeks. This play is all about father and son relationships. We have Prince Fortinbras, who wants to avenge the death of his father, King Fortinbras of Norway. We have Leotus and Polonius honors Leotus's wish to return to France so as to continue his studies. This is seconded by King Claudius because of Polonius's service to the throne. And the last father and son relationship we have is Prince Hamlet and his late father, King Hamlet of Denmark. It is quite evident that Hamlet honors his father in saying that he was a man, take him for all in all, I shall not look upon his like again. Hamlet expresses his wish to honor his mother by not returning to Wittenberg when he says, I shall in all my best obey you, madam. He does, however, not include King Claudius in this, which shows that he doesn't honor his uncle's wishes. Hamlet wishes to commit suicide, but believes in doing so he will be damned forever. He also accuses his mother of committing incest in having married her brother, which is strictly speaking inaccurate since he is her brother-in-law. Throughout history, cultural practices often encouraged marriage between a widow and a brother-in-law, but we feel his pain in his mother having jumped from one brother to the next. Claudius uses language as a tool to smooth over actions that are immoral. The courtiers desperately pretend that nothing is out of the ordinary, while Claudius snatched the throne from the actual heir, Prince Hamlet, and married the wife of his deceased brother, Queen Gertrude. It is difficult to imagine a more convoluted family dynamic or a more out-of-balance political situation, but Claudius nevertheless preaches an ethic of balance to his courtiers, pledging to sustain and combine the sorrow he feels for the king's death and the joy he feels for his wedding in equal parts. Claudius lectures Hamlet on what's natural, but in reality Claudius murdered his own brother. Horatio proves he is willing to speak honestly about reality, but noting the speed of the wedding. By emphasizing that how he is more important than how he seems, Hamlet implies that his interior reality is more powerful than any appearance or show. As discussed before, Hamlet accuses his mother, Laertes, Cornelius, and Voltimand of being insincere and that they are all about the show. Even though Ophelia has entered the court, she has not spoken a word throughout the entire scene. Her presence is required, but not her input. Gertrude has no intention to take to the throne of Denmark after the passing of her husband. This wouldn't have been a strange sight, considering that Shakespeare performed many a play to Queen Elizabeth I. It was thus not uncommon for a woman to take to the throne. One can argue that perhaps she wasn't eligible or next in line to take the throne, but then again, why didn't she prevent Claudius from snatching the throne from his son Hamlet? Queen Gertrude comes across as a happy-go-lucky queen who wants peace and love for everyone, a somewhat superficial view on women, if you ask me. Queen Gertrude's hasty marriage to her brother-in-law confuses Hamlet to the extent that he distrusts all women in their supposed affections, and it greatly affects his relationship with Ophelia later in the play.